Have you ever wondered what really happens behind closed doors in the lives of people we think we understand? Because sometimes, the truth doesn't just surprise you, it completely changes everything. And that's exactly what seems to have happened in the case of Nancy Guthrie. For years, Nancy was seen as a private, composed figure, someone who kept her personal life far away from the spotlight. But recently, whispers have started to spread about a decision she reportedly made regarding her estate, a decision so unexpected. It left even those closest to her stunned. What makes this even more shocking is the reaction from Savannah Guthrie and Annie Guthrie. Sources claim that neither of them saw this coming, not even close. So what exactly did Nancy do? Some reports suggest that her estate, something many assumed would follow a predictable path, may have been handled in a way that no one anticipated. Was it a last-minute change? A deeply personal decision, or something far more complicated hidden beneath the surface? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why? Because when decisions like this are made, they rarely come out of nowhere. There's always a story behind them, a reason, a moment that changes everything. Tonight we're diving deep into what's being said, what might have led to this shocking move, and why it has everyone talking. What you're about to hear might not be what you expected. For a long time, Nancy Guthrie was known as someone who stayed far away from unnecessary attention. Unlike many public figures whose lives are constantly under a microscope, Nancy managed to maintain a sense of privacy that almost felt rare in today's world. She wasn't someone you typically see surrounded by controversy or dramatic headlines. Instead, her life appeared calm, structured, and to most outsiders entirely predictable. Those closest to her, including Savannah Guthrie, often described Nancy as thoughtful and deeply intentional. She wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions. Every move she made seemed carefully considered, especially when it came to family matters and long-term plans. That's what makes the recent reports about her estate so surprising, because they don't seem to align with the Nancy people thought they knew. Behind the scenes, however, things may not have been as simple as they appeared. There have been quiet suggestions that Nancy had been reflecting on her life more deeply in recent years. Not in a dramatic or alarming way, but in the kind of way that leads someone to reassess priorities. People close to her noticed subtle changes, small shifts in how she spoke about the future, the way she valued certain relationships, and even how she approached legacy. And that word, legacy, may be the key to understanding everything, because for Nancy, it reportedly wasn't just about money or property, it was about meaning. About what would remain after she was gone, and how her decisions would impact the people she cared about the most. While many assumed her estate would follow a traditional path, there are now indications that she may have had a very different vision in mind. This is where things begin to take an unexpected turn. Sources claim that Nancy had been quietly organizing aspects of her estate long before anyone realized it. There were no big announcements, no dramatic conversations, just a series of private decisions that, taken together, could completely reshape expectations. And the most surprising part: very few people, if any, seemed to be fully aware of what she was planning, not even Annie Guthrie. For someone like Annie, who many believed would naturally be closely involved in such matters, this lack of awareness raises serious questions. Was Nancy intentionally keeping her plans private? Or did she believe there was simply no need to explain them? That uncertainty is what has fueled so much speculation. Because when a person known for being careful and considerate makes a decision that catches everyone off guard, people start looking for hidden reasons. Was there a shift in relationships? A moment that changed her perspective? Or perhaps something more emotional, something that never made it into public view? What makes this even more compelling is the timing. These revelations didn't come during a moment of crisis or public conflict. Instead, they surfaced quietly, almost unexpectedly, making them feel even more unsettling. It's as if a carefully written story suddenly revealed a no one knew existed. And now, those closest to Nancy are left trying to piece it all together. For Savannah Guthrie, the reaction has reportedly been one of genuine surprise. Not necessarily anger or confusion, but the kind of shock that comes from realizing there was more going on beneath the surface than anyone realized. It's the kind of moment that forces you to rethink everything you thought you understood about a person. Because sometimes, the people we believe we know best still have secrets. And as more details begin to emerge, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: Nancy's decisions weren't random. They were deliberate, thoughtful, and possibly rooted in something much deeper than anyone initially imagined. The real question now is not just what she did, but why she chose to do it this way. And that's where the story takes an even more unexpected turn, as the details surrounding Nancy Guthrie's estate slowly began to surface. What initially seemed like simple speculation started to take on a much deeper and more complex shape. This wasn't just a routine legal arrangement or a predictable distribution of assets. According to multiple reports, Nancy's choices may have gone completely against what those closest to her had always expected. And that's where the shock truly began. For years, people assumed that Nancy's estate would follow a familiar pattern, one that prioritized family in a clear and straightforward way. It's the kind of expectation most people naturally have. But what's being suggested now paints a very different picture. Instead of following tradition, Nancy may have taken a path that was far more personal and far less predictable. Some sources claim that significant portions of her estate were reportedly redirected in ways that no one saw coming. While the exact details remain unclear, what stands out is the apparent shift in priorities. It wasn't just about who received what, it was about why those decisions were made in the first place. And that why is where things become even more intriguing. There are whispers that Nancy may have been influenced by deeply personal experiences, moments that shaped how she viewed relationships, loyalty, and even legacy itself. These weren't public events or widely known incidents. Instead, they were quiet, private experiences that may have carried more weight than anyone realized at the time. For Savannah Guthrie, the reaction has reportedly been one of disbelief, not necessarily because of the financial aspect, but because of what the decision seemed to represent. When someone you trust makes a choice you didn't expect, it naturally raises questions, not just about the decision, but about everything leading up to it. Was there something she missed? A sign that went unnoticed. Meanwhile, Annie Guthrie is also said to have been caught off guard. Those familiar with the situation suggest that Annie, like many others, believed she had a clear understanding of Nancy's intentions. But as the details continue to unfold, that certainty has started to fade, and in its place, uncertainty has taken hold. Because when expectations are suddenly overturned, it forces everyone involved to reevaluate their assumptions. It's no longer just about the outcome, it's about understanding the reasoning behind it. And in Nancy's case, that reasoning appears to be anything but simple. Some believe her decisions may have been guided by a desire to leave behind more than just material wealth. There's a growing sense that she wanted her estate to reflect her values, her beliefs about what truly mattered. If that's true, then her choices weren't random at all. They were intentional, even if they were difficult for others to accept, but not everyone sees it that way. There are also quiet suggestions that tension may have existed beneath the surface, subtle, unspoken issues that never fully came to light. If that's the case, then Nancy's decisions could be seen in a very different way, not just as a reflection of her values, but as a response to something deeper, something unresolved. And that possibility is what makes this situation so complicated, because without clear answers, people are left to interpret the story in their own way. Some see it as a bold and independent choice, a woman taking control of her legacy on her own terms. Others view it as a surprising and even puzzling move that raises more questions than it answers. But one thing is certain, this wasn't a decision made lightly. Everything about Nancy's history suggests that she thought things through carefully. Which means whatever led her to this point must have been significant enough to outweigh expectations, traditions, and even the reactions of those closest to her. And now, as more pieces of the puzzle begin to come together, a new question is starting to emerge: what exactly happened behind the scenes that led to such a dramatic shift? Because decisions like this don't just appear out of nowhere, they come from somewhere. And the deeper you look, the more complicated the story becomes, as more attention began to surround the decisions made by Nancy Guthrie. A new layer of the story slowly started to emerge, one that wasn't immediately obvious but may have been there all along. Because sometimes, the most important details are the ones people openly discuss. They're the ones that remain quietly buried beneath the surface. For years, everything seemed stable from the outside. Nancy maintained her composed image, her relationships appeared steady, and there was little to suggest any underlying conflict. But those familiar with situations like this know one thing for certain: appearances can be deceiving. And now, there are growing suggestions that not everything within Nancy's inner circle was as smooth as it seemed. These weren't dramatic disputes or public disagreements. There were no headlines, no visible confrontations. Instead, if tensions existed, they were subtle, built over time through small misunderstandings, shifting priorities, or unspoken expectations. The kind of issues that don't explode overnight, but quietly shape decisions in ways no one fully realizes until it's too late. For Savannah Guthrie, this possibility adds an entirely new dimension to the situation. Because if Nancy's decisions were influenced by things that were never openly addressed, it means there may have been parts of her life that even those closest to her didn't fully understand. And that realization can be more unsettling than the decision itself. After all, it's one thing to be surprised by an outcome. It's another to realize you may have missed the signs leading up to it. Meanwhile, Annie Guthrie is also said to be processing these developments in her own way. Reports suggest that, like Savannah, she is trying to make sense of a situation that no longer fits the narrative she once believed. When someone's actions challenge your understanding of them, it forces you to revisit every memory, every interaction, searching for clues that might explain what happened. And sometimes those clues are only visible in hindsight. There are quiet whispers that certain relationships within Nancy's life may have shifted over time, not necessarily broken but changed. Priorities evolve, perspectives differ, and what once felt certain can slowly become complicated. If Nancy experienced these kinds of changes, it could help explain why her final decisions didn't align with what others expected. Because decisions about legacy are rarely just about assets. They're about people. They're about trust, connection, and the way someone chooses to define what matters most in the end. And if Nancy felt that certain aspects of her relationships had changed, even in small ways, it could have influenced how she chose to move forward. But here's where things become even more complex. Not everyone agrees on this interpretation. Some believe that the idea of hidden tensions is being exaggerated, that people are searching for explanations simply because the truth feels too unexpected. From this perspective, Nancy's decisions weren't the result of conflict, but of clarity. A clear, deliberate choice made by someone who understood exactly what she wanted her legacy to be. And that raises an important question. What if there was no conflict at all? What if Nancy simply saw things differently than everyone else? That possibility challenges everything. Because it suggests that the shock being felt now isn't the result of hidden problems, but of misplaced assumptions. That perhaps the people around her believed they understood her, when in reality, there was always more to her perspective than they realized. For Savannah Guthrie and Annie Guthrie, that's a difficult realization to process, not because it changes the past, but because it reshapes how they see it. Because when someone's final decisions don't match your expectations, you're left with two choices: question them or question what you thought you knew. And in this case, it seems like both are happening at the same time. As the story continues to unfold, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: there isn't just one explanation. There are layers to this situation, each one revealing a slightly different version of the truth. But the deeper you go, the more one question starts to stand out above all the rest. Was this really about relationships, or was it about something even bigger? Because if Nancy's decisions were driven by something beyond personal dynamics, something tied to her beliefs, her values, or even a long-held plan, then everything we've seen so far may only be part of a much larger story. And that final piece is still waiting to be uncovered. By the time the full weight of Nancy Guthrie's reported decisions began to sink in, it was clear that this was never just about an estate. It wasn't simply a matter of assets, legal documents, or financial distribution. What Nancy left behind was something far more powerful, a legacy that forced everyone to stop, reflect, and question what they thought they understood. Because in the end, it's not what someone leaves behind that defines them, it's why they chose to leave it that way. For Savannah Guthrie, this moment appears to have become something deeply personal. Reports suggest that the initial shock has slowly given way to reflection. Not just about Nancy's decisions, but about their relationship, their shared moments, and the things that may have gone unspoken over the years. When something like this happens, it creates a ripple effect. It doesn't just stay confined to one moment, it spreads, touching memories, emotions, and perspectives. And for Savannah, this may have been one of those rare moments where everything feels the same, yet completely different at the same time. Because now, every detail matters more. Every conversation, every memory, every small interaction that once seemed ordinary may now carry a new meaning. That's the power of a decision that no one expected. It doesn't just change the future, it reshapes the past. Meanwhile, Annie Guthrie is also said to be navigating this situation in her own way. While reactions may differ, the sense of surprise appears to be shared. And with that surprise comes a quiet process of understanding, of trying to see things from Nancy's perspective, even if that perspective was never fully explained. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from answers, it comes from acceptance. There's a growing belief among those following this story that Nancy's choices may have been less about reacting to specific people or situations, and more about expressing something deeply personal. Something that mattered to her on a level that others may not have fully seen. If that's true, then her decisions weren't meant to shock anyone. They were meant to mean something. And that changes everything, because it shifts the narrative from confusion to intention. From questioning what happened to understanding that perhaps in Nancy's mind, everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. But even with that perspective, the emotional impact remains. Decisions like these don't just fade away. They stay with the people affected by them, becoming part of their story moving forward. And for Savannah and Annie, this may be one of those defining moments. One that quietly shapes how they see not just Nancy but themselves, their relationships, and the idea of legacy as a whole. Because in the end, this story isn't just about one person's choices. It's about what those choices reveal. About the idea that even the most composed, private individuals can carry thoughts, beliefs, and intentions that never fully surface until the very end. And when they do, they can change everything in an instant. So what can we take from all of this? Maybe it's a reminder that people are more complex than they appear. That even those closest to us may have perspectives we don't fully understand. And that sometimes the biggest revelations don't come from what's said out loud, but from what's left behind. Because legacy isn't just about inheritance, it's about impact. And whether people agree with Nancy's decisions or not, one thing is undeniable. She made a choice that ensured she would be remembered, questioned, and talked about long after the moment itself passed. And maybe in her own way, that's exactly what she intended.